It's been more than 3 years since an explosion on a British Petroleum oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico caused the worst environmental disaster in U.S. history. A new study has found higher contamination levels than previously thought. For more on what this means, we turn to Dr. MacDonald, professor of biological oceanography at Florida State University. Dr. MacDonald, thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon.
Now, you and I spoke about this crisis 3 years ago as it was unfolding, and we talked about then about all of the things that could possibly happen. Now, in retrospect, in referring to this new report that was released in the New York Times, in which scientist Paul Sammarco questions the government's use, or at least their clearing of the reopening of fisheries in the Gulf, he states, quote, "It might be time to review the techniques that are used to determine such openings." Now, what is he referring to in layman's terms?
He found much higher concentrations of petroleum products, total petroleum and polyaromatic hydrocarbon petroleums in a variety of samples across a wide area of the Gulf. And the samples that he tested had higher concentrations than the samples that were reported by NOAA and other government agencies.
He also found did he also find a wider dispersion of the contamination that was previously reported, or were those estimations in line?
Well, his samples came from a wider area than was reported. And so, yes, I think he did find a wider distribution of positive samples for hydrocarbons.
Now, do these compounds that you talked about found in Sammarco's paper have an ability to affect human or the animal population if consumed?
He did not report samples of a concentration that would be an acute or chronic effect. He was simply noting the presence of these. And I should say that his samples were all collected in 2010 and are now being reported because it takes a long time to process through these data.
Now, this sampling method that he questioned here, this so-called Niskin bottle method, it's been regarded, I think, at least from what I've read in the scientific community, as a pretty outdated method for quite some time now. Why would the government, why would NOAA still use this method to determine contamination levels on such a catastrophic event?
I don't think that sampling by Niskin bottle is in by itself outdated, but the distribution of oil and the magnitude of oil that was released by the Deepwater Horizon blowout was absolutely unprecedented. And what Sammarco is pointing out is that a sample like collecting water with these Niskin samplers, it's a point sampling. So across such a wide area, his concern is that they may have missed patches of higher concentrations that they could have sampled by a different technique.
Now, in terms of your research, since this began right up until today, does still more need to be done in terms of the decontamination of this, 200 million barrel oil spill?
I don't think that there's been any conclusive evidence to show that there are toxic levels in seafood or in components of the environment where they would have an immediate effect on human health. The concern is for the broader ecological impacts, and the concern that Dr. Sammarco and his colleagues raised was whether the government was too hasty in reopening the waters of the Gulf of Mexico for fishing. Because in his results, he finds higher levels than they reported, but the decision to reopen the fisheries was based on these lower level sampling. So I think it's absolutely true, and I agree 100% with Dr. Sammarco, that we should use every opportunity to learn lessons from the very unfortunate events of the Deepwater Horizon and to rethink how we would respond to such a catastrophic spill. We hope that won't happen again, but we want to do a better job next time.
Let's talk about that in terms of the industry and what has changed in it since the Deepwater Horizon catastrophe 3 years ago. Do you think that the changes that were made by either the industry or forced upon them by the Obama administration go far enough?
I do not. I think that there's much more that could be done in terms of inspection. I think that the regulation and the requirements that we make for testing of blowout preventers, and for certifying the safety of drilling and production operations are much less stringent than they are in other places in the world. This is not something that I'm making up or an opinion. This is a fact. In the North Sea, operators are obliged to obey much more stringent standards than they are here in the United States. In Brazil, operators are obliged to obey much more stringent standards than they are here in the United States. I think we should go farther.
And in terms of what the BP has put out in terms of how much it thinks it should have spent in terms of cleaning it up and compensating the people, not only of the Gulf area who worked in this industry, but who were directly affected by it, who live there, do you think as they seek to cap their liability that they should be paying more?
Well, my concern is that the Gulf of Mexico not be last in line when it comes to receiving compensation. A lot of the compensation that's been paid to date has gone to hotel operators and fishermen and business owners along the Gulf, and they were quite understandably hurt economically by the events of the spill. But we must not lose track of the major damage, and that was the damage to the environment. I hope that the Gulf of Mexico will be first in line for a restoration, not last in line.
Now, BP obviously has done a lot to sort of reshape its image in the last 3 years because of this particular disaster. But based on your research or based on what's going on out there from what you could get from what you have your ear to, is there another potential for this disaster based on the industry practices of any particular other company or in general?
I do not know enough to point fingers, and I certainly would not do that. But I will point out that there have been this summer 2 well failure events, loss of well control with the result of a catastrophic fire. There were deaths on a production facility in the Gulf of Mexico. So there have been 2 events where supposedly 100% safe operations failed for one reason or another. And failed catastrophically. Fortunately, there was no major release of oil. Unfortunately, there were deaths and injuries. But this shows that the risks of oil production are ongoing. And the deeper you drill, the farther offshore your drilling operations, the greater the risk. And so as we move into deeper and deeper water, our regulation, our certification of safety has to be ever more stringent. My concern is that we have not fully followed on with increasing regulatory oversight, that we are not being as proactive as we were, for example, after the Exxon Valdez spill. If you recall, after the Exxon Valdez spill, within 1 year, Congress had passed the Oil Pollution Act, which completely rewrote the terms of safety for tanker operations and transport. We haven't done a similar review of production facilities, and it's been over 3 years since the Deepwater Horizon blowout.
Dr. Ian MacDonald from Florida State University, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.